when the world burned, only stories survived.
Zero. Patient, a novel, by Lev Hartwell. Except it isn't a novel. I'm going to tell you the truth about how I knew. People are going to read this and assume I was lucky, or that I'm exaggerating, or that I've done what writers do when reality catches up to their fiction, which is quietly adjust the timeline of their original predictions until it sounds like they called the whole thing from the beginning. I understand the skepticism. I'd be skeptical too. The claim that a 27-year-old thriller novelist living in a two-bedroom apartment with his older sister predicted a zombie apocalypse well enough to survive it sounds, on its face, like exactly the kind of story a 27-year-old thriller novelist would tell about himself. But here's the thing. I have the research files to prove it. 18 months before the outbreak, I published a book called Zero Patient. It was a pandemic thriller. Not zombies, exactly, not the shambling undead of the horror genre, but something I designed to be scientifically plausible. A rapid-onset neurological infection transmitted through direct blood contact, causing extreme aggression and the loss of higher cognitive function, spread through biting because the infected had no capacity to understand that biting was spreading the virus. My agent called it literary horror for people who read The Atlantic. The New York Times book review said I'd done the research, which was the nicest thing any reviewer had ever said to me, and which turned out to be more prophetic than anything in the actual book. I had spent 2 years researching Zero Patient. I had read every publicly available pandemic preparedness report published by the CDC, WHO, and FEMA since 2005. I had interviewed 4 epidemiologists, 3 virologists, a FEMA regional coordinator, and 1 retired bioweapons specialist who agreed to talk to me only after I signed something that I'm still not entirely sure was legal. I had modeled outbreak scenarios, studied transmission vectors, mapped the actual population density of Harlow City's downtown grid against historical pandemic spread rates, and built, in the process, what my editor called an uncomfortably detailed mental blueprint for the worst-case scenario. When the worst-case scenario arrived, I had the blueprint. That's the whole explanation. It isn't supernatural. It isn't coincidence. It's 2 years of obsessive research manifesting as a very, very bad day, when the thing you researched turns out to be real. I want to get that on record before anything else, because what follows is going to sound like I had some kind of prophetic gift, and I didn't. I had a library of pandemic modeling literature, a 12,000-word document of research notes that I'd titled Worst Case Scenarios Do Not Publish in Full, as a joke, and the specific, terrible disadvantage of being someone who had imagined all of this in exhaustive detail. What I had, in other words, was a playbook, somebody else's playbook. Real epidemiologists wrote it, real public health researchers filled in the margins, and I assembled it and put a story around it and sent it to bookstores and thought, well, at least now I know how the world ends. Now I knew. And it had started. The video appeared on August 8th at 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time on a platform I refused to name because they handled the early weeks of the outbreak with a level of institutional cowardice that I find genuinely unforgivable. I was awake. I'm usually awake at 11:47 p.m. I write at night and sleep badly in general, which my sister Nadia has been telling me to address since approximately 2019, and which I continue to not address because I am a novelist, and that's just the deal. I was working on the first chapter of my follow-up project, a story about a water shortage in the American Southwest, much less fun to research, when the notification appeared in the corner of my screen. Trending, factory incident video, graphic, viewer discretion advised. I looked at the thumbnail. I looked at it for a long time. I opened my research folder. I found the document, Worst Case Scenarios Do Not Publish in Full. I opened it to page 3, where I had written, 18 months ago, under the heading Initial Public Emergence. The first confirmed incident will likely be captured on security or bystander footage in an industrial or commercial setting. The infected will demonstrate aggressive biting behavior. Initial media coverage will frame it as a fight or an isolated mental health incident. Government response will be dismissive within 24 hours. I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I went to my sister's room. Nadia is 3 years older than me. She's a trauma surgeon, which is relevant both because of the outbreak and because it's the most Nadia thing imaginable. She's the kind of person who ran toward fires as a kid, while the rest of us ran away and grew up to make a career out of it. She keeps odd hours too, because trauma surgeons basically don't get to have a relationship with normal hours. But by midnight, she was usually in bed. I knocked. "If you're working on a chapter, go away," she said from inside. "I'm not." A pause. Something in my voice communicated the difference, because Nadia has always been able to tell. She opened the door in her scrubs with a coffee mug, which told me she'd been reading and not sleeping. "What is it?" she said. "I need you to look at something." We sat at the kitchen table and I showed her the video. Then I opened my laptop and showed her the document. I walked her through the specific prediction, not just the general shape of it, but the specific details. Industrial setting, biting behavior, dismissal from authorities, the timeline I'd modeled for progression from isolated incident to citywide containment failure. "Lev," she said, "I know. This could be a coincidence. The factory location, the bite mechanism, the specific behavioral presentation. Nadia, this is the transmission model from my research. The one I built from the CDC's own pandemic preparedness reports. Those reports cover a lot of scenarios. Not this specific one." I turned the laptop to face her. "Read page 7, the section on rapid neurological onset." She read it. She put her coffee down. "This is bad," she said. "Yes." "How bad?" "If your model is accurate." "If my model is accurate," I said, "then in about 19 days, this city is going to be unlivable. The outbreak will spread faster than anything the emergency response system is prepared to handle, because the transmission window is too short. You go from exposed to infectious in under 10 minutes, which is faster than anyone can quarantine effectively. By the time the government issues a shelter-in-place order, it'll be too late for most people who aren't already sheltered." She was quiet for a moment. "What do we do?" she said. "We prepare," I said. "We have 19 days. She looked at me for a long time. Nadia has a way of doing that, a long, assessing look that feels like being X-rayed. She's done it since we were kids. It's not unkind, it's just thorough. "I believe you," she said. I exhaled. "You believe me? You spent 2 years researching this. You talked to virologists. You modeled transmission rates." She picked up her coffee again. "Either your research was accurate and this is real, or your research was inaccurate and we spent some money unnecessarily. Those are not equally bad outcomes." She stood up. "I'm calling in for my vacation days tomorrow. Let's make a list. This is my sister. This is who she is. Other people in her position would have told me to sleep it off, that I'd had too much coffee, that writers are paranoid by nature. Nadia made a list. I'm going to be grateful for that for the rest of my life." The apartment was a problem from the start. We'd moved back in together 2 years after our parents died. The house they'd left us felt too large for either of us alone, and the Harlow real estate market made the math easy. But the apartment itself, a 2-bedroom in a building called the Meridian, was exactly wrong for what we needed. 4th floor, no yard, surrounded by 10,000 other units within 4 blocks in every direction. Downtown adjacent. Every single epidemiological fact I'd spent 2 years accumulating pointed to the same conclusion. High population density is where this gets catastrophic. "We need to leave the city," I told Nadia. "Where?" "Somewhere with space, a yard, defensible perimeter." I'd written a chapter about this in Zero Patient, the one my editor had called a little survivalisty. The suburbs, 20, 25 miles out. Somewhere people can't just walk up to our door. Our lease runs through January. We break it, or we sublet. I did the math. We have the money from my advance and the inheritance. We can afford to do this. We found the house through a real estate agent who had clearly seen stranger requests, but was too professional to say so. It was a property about 22 miles outside downtown Harlow, in a neighborhood that had peaked economically in the late 90s and was now the kind of place where houses sat on large lots and people kept boats in their driveways. The previous owner had been a man named Howard Vance, 68 years old, an engineer by training, retired, and, by every account including his obituary, deeply committed to emergency preparedness. Howard Vance had, over 15 years, transformed an ordinary colonial into something that defied description in the real estate listing, which spent considerable energy calling it distinctive. What it was? A 12-foot concrete block perimeter wall around the property, a reinforced steel front gate with a keypad entry, a house where the first 2 floors had been stripped of exterior windows. Howard had filled them in, installed interior lighting, and converted the spaces to storage and utility functions. The 3rd floor was the living space, bedrooms, kitchen, a living room, and a covered roof deck that he'd built for observation purposes. In the middle of the property, inside the walls, was a courtyard, fruit trees, raised garden beds, a rainwater collection system. Howard Vance had prepared for exactly this and died before it arrived. And his family had sold the property at a discount because nobody else wanted a house with no windows on the ground floor. We closed on the rental in 6 days. I called it Harold's house in my head because Howard felt too formal, and I needed to feel some affection for the man whose decisions were going to keep us alive. The agent thought I was naming it after myself, which I didn't correct because it felt like the wrong time to explain. I pulled up my research document on the drive out and read, for the 100th time, the section I'd written on survival timelines. The key variable in individual survival is not strength or aggression, but preparation time. Every day of preparation before containment failure translates to approximately 3 additional weeks of viability in a shelter-in-place scenario. The households that survive are not the ones that react best. They're the ones that started first. We had 19 days. We started the next morning. Water first. I'd modeled this in the book. One of the first infrastructure failures in a fast-spread outbreak is the water system. Not because it fails immediately, but because the personnel required to maintain it stop showing up for work at a rate that outpaces what the system can absorb. By day 12 of an uncontrolled urban outbreak, you start seeing pressure drops. By day 20, in the worst-case scenario, you're looking at contamination risk from pipes that weren't meant to run without human monitoring. We needed water independence. I found 5 different water delivery companies and placed separate orders with each of them, staggered over different days, using slightly different contact details for each. The explanation I gave to all of them, a well water sensitivity issue requiring purified water for all household use, didn't fully hold up to scrutiny, but water delivery companies are not in the business of scrutinizing. By the end of the 2nd week, the basement of Harold's house had enough stored water to last 18 months at our consumption rate, which I'd calculated based on the same public health data I'd used for the book. Nadia handled the food because Nadia has a systematic mind that translates well to bulk purchasing. She distributed orders across 37 different online vendors, buying in quantities that wouldn't flag any single purchase, paying attention to caloric density, shelf life, and nutritional variety. Freeze-dried meals, canned goods, dried legumes, rice, protein bars, vitamins. The things that keep, the things that sustain. We need vegetables, I said. We have vitamins. Vitamins aren't vegetables. We need seeds and soil. She added it to the list without argument, which was how I knew she'd already thought about it. The medical supplies were entirely her domain. I handed her a budget number and told her she knew better than I did what we'd need, which was true. She came back 3 days later with a list that included surgical instruments I hadn't expected. A suture kit? I said. People get hurt, she said. We're not going to be able to call an ambulance. Are you, Nadia, are you going to do surgery in Harold's house? I hope not, she said. But if I have to, I want the tools. This was the most Nadia thing she'd ever said, and she'd said a lot of Nadia things in my life. I added it to my mental list of reasons why, if you are going to be trapped in a fortress during a zombie apocalypse, your sister being a trauma surgeon is the single best possible variable in your favor. Power was next. Harold's house had a diesel generator that we tested and maintained, but diesel is a consumable, and I was thinking about the long game. We contracted a solar installation company under the explanation that we'd been wanting to go off-grid for environmental reasons, which was at least philosophically coherent. And they installed a system over 4 days while Nadia and I pretended to be ordinary people making an environmentally conscious lifestyle choice. The solar tech who finished the last panel said, "You've got enough capacity here to run a small medical clinic." Nadia, standing in the courtyard, said, "Good." The tech gave me a look that I chose to interpret as professional admiration. Weapons were the conversation I'd been putting off. My research for Zero Patient had included a chapter on firearm logistics in outbreak scenarios that my editor had asked me to tone down because, as she put it, the gun stuff is making it feel like a manifesto. I toned it down. But the research was there. In a scenario where law enforcement capacity collapses before military intervention arrives, which my modeling suggested would happen within 10 to 14 days of full containment failure, the only thing standing between you and people who want what you have is your own capacity to defend it. I'd taken a handgun course 2 years ago for research. I was not good at it. I went back and took another one, this time with Nadia, who turned out to have a completely unearned beginner's aptitude for shooting that I found both impressive and slightly unfair. We bought what we needed. We didn't buy more than we needed. We stored it correctly. On August 19th, 1 day before my research model predicted the online viral spread would begin, Nadia and I ordered takeout from the barbecue place we'd been going to since college and ate it at the kitchen table in Harold's house, with the windows showing the courtyard fruit trees and the evening light going golden through the skylights Harold had installed on the roof deck. "We're either very prepared," Nadia said, pulling ribs apart, "or we've done something very irrational with our savings and our mental health." "Yeah," I said. "I'm genuinely not sure which." "Me neither." "But we did our best." "We did our best," I agreed. She clinked her sweet tea against my water glass. "To doing our best," she said. We ate every single thing we'd ordered and finished with banana pudding that we'd been saving for a special occasion and decided this qualified. It was the last meal I ate that tasted completely like before. Not because the food got worse after, it didn't, we were well stocked, but because the before ended the next morning, and food that comes after tastes different. Like everything else that comes after. Nourishing, sometimes even good, but changed in a way you can't unchange. I did a live stream on August 20th. This was not in the research document. This was my own decision, made at 2 in the morning after staring at the ceiling of my bedroom in Harold's house and thinking about the people I knew who were not prepared, who would not be prepared, who had no reason to think they needed to be. My parents' friends, my college roommate, the woman who ran the coffee shop on Mercer Street and always remembered my order. I couldn't save all of them, I knew that. I'd built this into the novel, the terrible arithmetic of limited resources and survival decision-making. The cold understanding that in a genuine collapse event, you cannot prepare for everyone, and trying to do so undermines your capacity to prepare for anyone, including yourself. But I could say something. I created a new account. I put on a Halloween mask, a realistic one I'd bought for a party 2 years ago and never returned. A generic intruder typeface that covered everything above my jaw. And I went live at 2:17 a.m. with approximately nothing to lose. I'm going to tell you something and you're not going to believe me, I said to the 16 people who were watching. But I need you to hear it anyway. There's a viral outbreak that's going to get significantly worse in the next week. The government is going to underreact until it's too late to contain. I need you to stock up on food and water, stay home as much as possible, and have a plan for a prolonged period of not being able to leave. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you this because I've spent 2 years studying pandemic transmission models, and what's happening right now fits the worst-case scenario exactly. The comments were mostly what I expected. Clout chaser, fearmonger, delete this. Who is this guy? This is fear-mongering. LOL, okay bro. I kept going for 20 minutes. I tried to be calm and specific and cite my sources. I answered a few questions. Then I ended the stream, sat in my research notes for a while, feeling like I'd thrown a message in a bottle into the ocean, and went to sleep. In the morning, I found a DM from an account called @DLN_field. I'm looking at the same data you are. How long? Short. Careful. No identifying information. The kind of message sent by someone who already knew the answer and was cross-referencing. 10 days, I wrote back. Maybe 12. Thank you, they wrote. I deleted the account because putting my actual name on a doomsday livestream felt like a bad idea, and because I was tired. And I thought, I did what I could. One person listened. Maybe that matters. I would think about @DLN_field for weeks before I found out who they were. The first day of the full outbreak, August 27th, arrived with the specific irony of a beautiful morning. Clear sky, light breeze, the kind of late August weather that makes you think summer is going to last forever. Right up until the moment, it doesn't. Nadia and I had been up since before dawn, which had become our habit in the last week as the situation outside had been escalating in the news in ways that matched my model like a tracking shot. The government issuing mixed messages, the emergency alert system being tested, the incident reports from downtown Harlow getting stranger and more frequent with each day. We were on Harold's roof deck with coffee and binoculars when the first definitive thing happened. A car ran a stop sign 2 blocks from our property and hit a fire hydrant. Normal enough, except the car just sat there, engine running, for 90 seconds without anyone getting out. Then the doors opened. The people who stepped out moved wrong. I'd written about it in the book. I'd tried to describe it accurately. The gait of someone whose higher brain functions have been overridden. The blank, tracking quality of the eyes. The way they oriented toward the nearest warm body, the way a compass orients north. I'd written it. I hadn't wanted to see it. There it is, Nadia said quietly. There it is. A neighbor had come out to look. She was maybe 50 feet from the car. The scene that followed took about 45 seconds and included 2 people becoming 4 people, and then 4 people becoming 8. The old exponential math that I'd modeled on a spreadsheet and that was appalling to watch as actual human beings. Close the deck, I said. Nadia was already moving. We went inside. We pulled the storm shutters. We turned on the radio, battery-powered, one of Harold's, and listened to the emergency broadcast begin its escalating series of advisories. Shelter in place, avoid all public spaces, do not approach anyone exhibiting unusual behavior. I recognized the exact language from the CDC's crisis communication templates. The protocol was right. The timing was catastrophically late. What do we do now? Nadia asked, standing in Harold's kitchen with her coffee going cold. We wait, I said. We watch. We don't open the gate. And we play checkers, I said, which was the most absurd thing I'd said in the context of an apocalypse. But she understood what I meant. We keep doing normal things. We stay human. We don't let the extraordinary turn us into people we won't recognize later. She found the checkers set in Harold's closet. Howard Vance had been the kind of man who kept board games on hand, which was one more thing to love about him. And we sat at the kitchen table and played 3 games while the emergency broadcast continued its slow escalation from advisory to warning to do not leave your home in the background. She won 2 out of 3. she always wins. The rule in our family, established by our father, was that the loser does dishes. So I did dishes while she watched the news on the laptop and took notes in the systematic, almost medical way she processes information when she's trying to understand something complicated. Their behavioral pattern is consistent with loss of prefrontal function, she said, from behind the screen. But they're still motor competent. That's unusual for viral encephalopathy. That's what I modeled, I said, rinsing. The infection doesn't cause total neurological shutdown. It overrides executive function and drives compulsive transmission behavior while leaving motor skills largely intact. Your book was right. My research was right. My book used my research. Is there a difference? I thought about it. Emotionally, yes. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Our aunt called that evening. I want to tell this part carefully because it matters and because it says something true about what happens to people in crisis. Some people become the version of themselves they were always capable of and just needed the occasion to become. And some people become a sharper, meaner version of what they already were. Our aunt, our mother's sister, a woman with whom we'd had a complicated relationship since our parents' accident, called Nadia's phone at 7 in the evening and spoke for approximately 4 minutes before I took the phone and ended the call. The gist was, she knew we'd been preparing. Someone had mentioned the deliveries. She wanted to know what we had. She wanted to come stay with us. She wanted to make this about everything our family had argued about in the years since our parents died, and she wanted to make it about that right now, at the start of the apocalypse, because crisis apparently clarifies people's priorities, and hers had not clarified in any direction I found admirable. No, I said, which was the entirety of my contribution to the call. That's your family, she said. No, I said again, and ended it. Nadia looked at me from across the table. You should have let me handle that. You would have been more patient than the situation required. I'm a surgeon. I have a professional obligation to be precise even when I want to be blunt. I'm a novelist. I don't. She was quiet for a moment. We should have told them earlier, before all of this. She meant warned them, given them the chance to prepare. I thought about this. I tried, I said, the live stream. That wasn't aimed at Aunt Carol. No, I said, because Aunt Carol would have told everyone we knew, and everyone we knew would have shown up here, and we can't support that many people with what we have. The math was brutal. I'd built it into the novel, too. The decision-making that happens when resources are genuinely limited, and you have to make choices about who you share them with. In the book, my protagonist had struggled with this. In real life, I found I'd already made the decision. I didn't feel good about it. I was going to feel worse about it in the days ahead, but I'd made it, and I was keeping it, because the alternative was a different kind of failure. You're a novelist, Nadia said, not a god. I know. So stop looking like you're responsible for everything that happens to everyone. I researched it, I said. I knew. That comes with some responsibility. It comes with the responsibility of protecting what you can protect, she said. Which is us. That's enough. That's already a lot. She reached across the table and squeezed my arm. Not sentiment. Nadia doesn't really do sentiment, but something solid. Present. The physical language of a person telling you they're still here. I did the dishes again. Nobody had lost at checkers. I just needed to do something with my hands. The neighbor with the laser pointer appeared on day 11. We'd established a watch rotation by then. 2-hour shifts on the roof deck, binoculars, radio, log of what we observed. Harold had left the roof deck partly enclosed, with a low wall and what I can only describe as observation slits, like a very thoughtful fortress. We could see the street in both directions and most of the neighboring properties without being visible from outside. The property directly across the street from Harold's gate had appeared unoccupied since we'd arrived. Dark windows, no movement, no sign of life. I'd catalogued it on day 2 as empty and moved on. On day 11, in the late afternoon, a red laser dot swept across our gate. I tracked it back to its source without moving, slow pan of the binoculars, angle of incidence suggesting a second-story window of the house directly opposite. Someone inside, watching us with enough sophistication to use a ranging device. Someone who had been there long enough and quiet enough that we'd miss them. "We have a problem," I told Nadia. She read the situation the same way I had, and faster. They've been watching us long enough to know what we have. The deliveries, the fruit trees, the solar installation. They know this place is worth something. They haven't tried to approach yet. They will when the pressure gets high enough, she thought. Water or food, whichever runs out first for them. We adjusted our schedule. No unnecessary movement in the courtyard. No lights visible from outside after dark, which Harold's blackout shutters made easy. Rotation continued, focused specifically on the house across the street. And for 3 days, we watched it in careful, patient 2-hour increments. The man who eventually appeared wore full tactical dress for a 63-degree September afternoon. Heavy jacket, neck gaiter pulled up to his nose, work gloves, and a motorcycle helmet that he apparently felt provided adequate anonymity. He moved with the confidence of someone who had convinced himself he was clever. He had under his arm a Bluetooth speaker, and I watched him carry it to the edge of the neighboring property, the Garcias, a retired couple who had been quietly, miserably not evacuating across the street, and, after a pause, hurl it over their fence. The speaker played 2 bars of something I couldn't identify from the roof before the crowd of zombies on the north end of the block pivoted toward it. The man in the helmet waited for the crowd to thin, then moved toward our gate. I went downstairs. Harold's gate was solid steel, with a keypad entry on the outside and 2 internal deadbolts on the inside. I knew what was coming because I'd been thinking about it for 3 days. He'd try the keypad first, then try to pick the lock, then lose his patience and try force. I positioned myself behind the gate with a flashlight and the firearm I'd spent 2 very uncomfortable ranges learning to use, and I listened to the specific sounds of a man working through exactly that sequence. Keypad attempts, 7, unsuccessful. Lockpicking, 90 seconds of sound, then a pause, then the door didn't open because the internal deadbolts don't respond to external lock manipulation. And then a small axe, hitting Harold's gate with the sound of someone hitting Harold's gate with a small axe, which produced exactly nothing except noise. Harold had not built his gate to be defeated by a small axe. Howard Vance, engineer, had over-engineered for exactly this possibility. The noise attracted attention from the street. After 4 swings, the man stopped. Then, in a completely changed voice, soft, urgent, carefully pitched for sympathy. "Hello? Is someone in there? Please, I just need help. I haven't eaten in 3 days. My family is—" I said nothing. "Please, I'll work for food. I'll do whatever you need. I said nothing. The sounds outside changed, shuffling. The distant crowd from the north, some of them moving toward the new noise of the axe strikes. He'd made a mistake. I heard him leave, fast. I went upstairs and watched through the binoculars as he retreated across the street and into the Garcia house. Not his own house, not the dark house he'd been hiding in. The Garcia house, where the retired couple we'd watched walk together in the evenings were currently trying to survive. I put the binoculars down. "He went into the Garcias," I told Nadia. She didn't say anything. We both knew what that probably meant. What happened over the next 2 days was visible from our roof deck in fragments. Lights in the Garcia house that hadn't been there before. Movement behind their curtains. And then, on the 3rd morning, a black SUV moving slowly down our street, with the careful, deliberate pace of someone using it as a decoy, tailing a cluster of zombies away from the area, clearing a temporary path. A man in military fatigues came over the Garcia fence while the street was clear. He was in the house for 10 minutes. When the front door opened again, Mrs. Garcia came out first, held close and sheltered, and behind her, the man who had knocked on our gate with a small axe, hands behind his back, moving in a way that suggested he was not doing so voluntarily. The soldier guided Mrs. Garcia to the SUV, while his associate handled the man in the helmet. And then a woman burst out of the house 2 doors down, one of the unaccounted-for neighbors we'd noted, and the soldier cleared the 3 zombies following her in 4 shots and helped her into the vehicle. They drove away. The man with the axe was left on the curb, hands still restrained. The zombies from the north found him in about 4 minutes. Nadia watched this with the expression she uses during surgeries, fully present, completely still, taking in information without reacting to it. "The Garcia's son," I said. "She mentioned him once. Marines. He came back for her." "Yeah. He didn't come back soon enough." "No." We were quiet. "There's nothing left in this neighborhood," Nadia said. "Mrs. Garcia was the last one who wasn't us, or—" she gestured at the dark house across the street. "I think so. Then it's just us for a while." "Just us for a while," I agreed. This sounds bleak, and it was, but there was also something clarifying about it. We had good walls. We had enough food for 18 months. We had solar power and a rainwater system, and fruit trees coming into their 2nd growing season in Harold's courtyard. We had each other. In a situation where all variables were terrible, those were the good ones, and I was keeping track of them. I should tell you about the vegetables. This isn't a digression. The vegetables are important. They're important practically. You cannot subsist on freeze-dried meals and canned goods indefinitely without your body registering a complaint that becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. And they're important in the way that doing something ordinary is important when everything else is extraordinary. You grow things because the act of growing things is the opposite of everything else that's happening. But also, genuinely, practically, I was constipated. I want to be honest about this because apocalypse memoirs tend to skip the mundane physical realities of being a human body in survival mode. And I think that's a disservice to future readers who are preparing for their own apocalypses. Your digestive system, deprived of fresh vegetables and operating on the particular combination of stress and preserved food that makes up a shelter-in-place diet, will object. It will object loudly, from the inside, in a way that is impossible to ignore and that I had, frankly, not budgeted sufficient attention to when building our supply inventory. "I need to plant things," I told Nadia on day 22. "We have fiber supplements." "We need real vegetables." She looked at me with the specific assessment of a physician evaluating a patient who is trying to tell them something in the most indirect possible terms. "How bad?" she said. "I had a dream about broccoli last night," I said. "That's how bad." We planted spinach and kale and 3 kinds of lettuce, because those grew fastest. I followed Harold's instructions. He'd left a detailed binder, because of course he had. Howard Vance left instructions for everything. On soil preparation, seed spacing, watering schedules. I did it wrong a few times and then did it right, which is how you learn anything. Nadia handled the soil amendment. I handled the seed spacing. We argued about the depth of the kale seeds. Her position, exactly 1/2 inch. My position, approximately 1/2 inch, give or take. Her position, that is not how depth works, Lev. And arrived at a compromise that was 1/2 inch. The spinach came up in 19 days. I was alone in the courtyard when I noticed it. Green, small, unmistakable, pushing up through the dark soil in Harold's raised bed. I crouched there for a while without getting up. I looked at it. It was spinach. I had put seeds in dirt and watered them, and now there was spinach. You would think this would be a minor thing. In the context of a zombie apocalypse, spinach is approximately 4th on the list of relevant concerns. But standing in Harold's courtyard on a cold October morning with 12 feet of concrete block between me and whatever the neighborhood had become, looking at spinach I had grown myself, felt like the most hopeful thing I'd experienced in weeks. I painted a sign for the spinach bed. I painted one for the kale. I painted one for the lettuce that said, "Lettuce bed, hands off, Nadia," which she later defaced to say, "Grow your own, Lev," which is still up there as of the last time I checked. The caterpillars showed up in week 6. I want you to understand that I had survived multiple crises at this point with my composure more or less intact. I had watched the city outside our walls become something unrecognizable. I had listened to our aunt call us every name she could think of through a phone speaker. I had stood behind Harold's gate while a man hit it with an axe and said nothing. I had done all of this without, as Nadia would put it, losing my whole mind. The caterpillars nearly finished me. They were just caterpillars. Small, green, faintly fuzzy. They had found my spinach and were going about their caterpillar business with no awareness whatsoever of how personally I was taking it. The spinach I had grown. The spinach that had represented hope and fiber and my capacity to sustain life even when surrounded by the failure of all other systems. Nadia refused to help because Nadia's digestive system was, as she put it with no sympathy whatsoever, perfectly functional. I spent 2.5 hours removing caterpillars by hand from my spinach bed while wearing gardening gloves and saying several things that I will not reproduce here. Nadia watched from her folding chair in the courtyard with an expression of professional detachment that I found unhelpful. "You're actually very gentle with them," she observed. "I'm not gentle with them, I'm thorough." "You apologized to one of them." "I was establishing boundaries." "Lev, what?" "You apologized to a caterpillar for removing it from the spinach." I said, "Excuse me, that's different from apologizing." She wrote something in her notebook. She had been keeping a zombie behavior journal, which was the most Nadia response to an apocalypse I could imagine. Systematic observation, documented data, conclusions held loosely pending further evidence. I didn't know yet that this journal was going to matter. The spinach survived. The caterpillars lost. I ate the first spinach salad of the New World alone in Harold's kitchen and felt something unclench in my chest that had been tight for 6 weeks. Then I went and wrote about it, because that's what I do. The radio came on day 38. I should be more specific. The radio from @DLN_field came on day 38. The one I hadn't been expecting to hear from. It arrived in a lockbox at our gate. We found it on a morning run to check the perimeter. Steel box, combination lock. The combination, when I tried it, was 0827, August 27th, the date the outbreak began. Inside, a Glock 43 in a soft case, 2 magazines of 9mm, and a handwritten note on index card paper. Frequency 152.075. I owe you more than this. Use it when you need to. R. Just the initial. Professional habit, or caution, or both. I stood in Harold's courtyard and turned the card over in my hands. Nadia read it over my shoulder. "Your DM person," she said. "Yeah. They found you. From a deleted account. I ran it through a VPN, but there are always traces if you know where to look." I thought about the stream. I'd been careful, but not careful enough to defeat someone who was actually trying to find me. They're good at this. "That's either reassuring or alarming," Nadia said. "Both," I said. I keep landing on both. We put the radio on the kitchen shelf and spent 3 days listening to the frequency without transmitting, building a picture. The traffic was sparse, brief, coded, clearly professional, and it told me this was not a random civilian. This was someone operating with training and equipment and a level of organization that suggested institution rather than improvisation. I'd been thinking about who at DLN_field might be since the DM. And the more I thought about it, the more I suspected something that I didn't want to say out loud because it felt like too much to process. My research for Zero Patient had included a chapter on government continuity of operations. The teams and units specifically designed to remain functional when normal systems failed. Units that would have been monitoring the exact same data sources I was monitoring. Units that would have seen the outbreak coming in their own models.
Units that might have paid attention to a live stream from a novelist in a Halloween mask, claiming to have specific knowledge of the timeline. I put that thought in a holding pattern and went back to watching the spinach grow. The raider convoy found us on day 43. We'd been warned, actually.
3 days earlier, the radio frequency had carried traffic that Nadia had decoded partially. References to a group operating in our sector, described in terms that made clear they were not a rescue team. 7 people in 2 vehicles. Methodical. Using live people as sound decoys to move zombie clusters. Stripping occupied and unoccupied properties alike. We had prepared for this scenario. Nadia and I had discussed it in the context of my research. I'd written an entire section on the secondary threat in outbreak scenarios, the human actors who fill the power vacuum left by collapsed institutions. I'd called it, in the book, the interval problem, the period between when laws stop being enforced and when new social contracts emerge is the most dangerous window for interpersonal violence. Because it's the moment when the only constraint on behavior is personal conscience. And personal conscience is not evenly distributed. We had our weapons loaded. We had the gate deadbolted. We had watched them come from 3 blocks north and work their way toward us with the systematic efficiency of people who had been doing this for long enough to have developed a process. Their process? One vehicle drives ahead slowly, trailing a cluster of zombies in a new direction. Clears the immediate area. Then the second vehicle moves in while the crowd is occupied, and the team enters properties, takes what they can carry, moves on. Efficient, brutal. They had been doing it long enough to have burned through any squeamishness they might have started with. We watched them enter 3 houses between us and where they'd started. "They're going to ram the gate," I said, "when the keypad doesn't work." "The gate holds," Nadia said. "I know the gate holds, but the sound of ramming a gate will attract zombies from the surrounding area, which will complicate their exit." She looked at me. "We can't stop them from trying. But the gate holds, Lev. Howard built it right." "Harold," I said. "What?" "I call him Harold." She gave me a look. "The gate holds." I was at the ground floor with the deadbolt and the radio when their truck reversed for a second run at the gate. I had the radio in my hand. I was trying to decide, the decision I'd been circling for 3 days without making, whether to transmit. The first hit landed like a bell being rung. The gate shook. It held. A second hit, harder. The gate held. The radio crackled. One word. Steady. And then, from outside, gunfire. Not our gate. From behind the convoy. I had about 3 seconds to understand what was happening before it was over. They'd been flanked. Someone had come up behind the convoy while the team was focused on us, and the engagement was fast and decisive in the way that fast, decisive engagements are when one side is prepared for them and the other hasn't. When it was over, the radio said, "We have a casualty. Do you have medical supplies?" I looked up the stairs to where Nadia was already standing with her kit bag. "Yes," I said, and I opened the gate. There were 5 of them. The one in front, female, late 20s, dark hair, wearing the kind of tactical clothing that looked worn in rather than new, had the self-possessed calm of someone accustomed to operating in situations worse than this one. She was supporting a taller man behind her, early 30s, who was holding his left shoulder with his right hand and breathing in the controlled, deliberate way of someone who had been trained to breathe through pain. 3 others behind them. A young man with the barely suppressed energy of someone who had been running on adrenaline for weeks. A quieter one who watched everything and said nothing. And one more, youngest, who was already scanning the property with the professional thoroughness of a much older person. The woman in front looked at me. "Lev Hartwell," she said, not a question. "Yeah," I said. "Rowan Delaney." She gave me 2 seconds to process this. "Let's get inside." The injured man was Felix Navarro. That was the first name I heard, because it was the one being deployed with urgent frequency as Nadia moved through the entry hall and made her assessment. Nadia, in professional mode, is something to witness. Everything else drops away, and what's left is pure function. She was already checking his pulse before Felix had fully crossed the threshold. "How long ago?" she said. 40 minutes, Rowan said. "Clean exit?" "Entry only, left shoulder, high." "Get him upstairs. 3rd floor, first room on the left. Don't let him use the left arm." She was already 3 steps ahead of us, already thinking through what she was going to need. Nadia performed surgery in Harold's house. In the surgical kit she'd bought because people get hurt and we won't be able to call an ambulance. In the room we'd set up with the table and the good light and the supplies she'd organized 2 weeks ago against exactly this possibility. Because Nadia doesn't prepare for the scenarios she wants. She prepares for the ones she doesn't want, which is the only kind of preparation that counts. I sat in the hallway outside while it happened, next to the young one. Arlo, he told me, 22. Just trying to be useful wherever I can. And across from the quiet one, whose name was Vale, and who communicated exclusively through nods and eyebrow movements that I was slowly learning to interpret. The one who talked was Quinn. Quinn talked. Quinn had been talking since he came through the gate, a running commentary on the last 40 minutes of his life delivered with the rapid, almost performative energy of someone who processes fear through narration. He wasn't anxious exactly, he was regulating. I recognized it because I do the same thing in writing, except I do it on the page rather than out loud. Externalization of internal experience as a coping mechanism. We weren't so different. He told me about the convoy. He told me how they'd intercepted the vehicles 2 miles north and followed them for 2 days before deciding to intervene. He told me about the engagements they'd already had and the ones they'd avoided and the specific operational logic behind the decision to engage here, near our property rather than somewhere else. He told me, with a sidelong glance at the woman sitting at the end of the hall, that Rowan Delaney had identified our property 3 weeks ago as a relevant point of interest. "From the stream?" I said. "From the stream," he confirmed, "and some other things." "Other things?" "She's very thorough," Quinn said diplomatically, and left it there. Rowan sat at the end of the hallway with the contained stillness of someone who had figured out how to be patient a long time ago and had made peace with it. She wasn't ignoring the conversation. She was listening to it, to all of it, simultaneously. The surgical sounds from the room, Quinn's monologue, Vale's silence, and whatever information the walls were giving her about the structure and layout of the house. I got the sense that she was always doing several things at once and found the discipline not to show it. I got up and sat next to her. "You trace the live stream," I said. "IP, account creation metadata, cross-referenced with subscriber data from your publisher's newsletter." She said it matter-of-factly. You made it findable if you knew what to look for." "I thought I was reasonably anonymous." "Reasonably," she agreed. "But your research notes were cited in your novel's acknowledgments, and your novel cited specific CDC reports, and those reports were associated with specific briefing distribution lists." She looked at me. "You knew before anyone official was willing to say it publicly. That made you someone worth paying attention to." "I wrote a thriller," I said, "with an 18-month research trail that predicted the transmission mechanism, the outbreak timeline, and the infrastructure failure sequence accurately enough that I pulled the book while I was still reading the reports." She held my gaze. "I asked you how long we had, and you told me 10 days. You were off by 4 hours." I didn't say anything. "I don't know how you knew," she said. "I've been trying to figure it out since August 8th. The most plausible explanation is that your model was good and you got lucky with the timing." "That's the most plausible explanation," I said. "Is it the right one?" "It's the one I'd go with," I said, which was not the same as yes, but was as close as I could get to honesty without sounding delusional. She nodded slowly. "Filed it." "How is he going to be?" she said, meaning Felix. "If my sister operates on you, you're going to be fine," I said. "That's not false comfort. She is very good at her job." "I know," she said. I looked into her too. Of course she had. "You're thorough," I said. "Reasonably," she said, and the corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but its architectural predecessor. The thing that smiles are built from. Nadia came out of the room 2 hours later with her sleeves rolled down and the specific, exhausted composure of a surgeon who had just done what she needed to do and now needed to transition to recovery protocols. Bullets out, she said. No major vascular involvement. He'll need rest and antibiotics and to not do anything strenuous for 2 weeks. She looked at Rowan. He can stay here. The monitoring is better than whatever you can provide in transit. We appreciate it, Rowan said. Don't appreciate it. It's what you do when someone needs medical care and you have the capacity to provide it. Nadia said this with the no-nonsense warmth of someone who has strong feelings about the ethics of medical care and doesn't see an apocalypse as a relevant exception. What I'd appreciate is for all of you to stay for dinner. I cooked dinner. I want to be specific about what I made because it matters. White bean soup with the last of our fresh kale, canned tomatoes, garlic, and the good olive oil from the bottles we'd stored. Cornbread from the mix I'd bought in industrial quantities because I like cornbread and wasn't willing to give it up for the apocalypse. Brownies from a mix because I had 20 of them and no particular reason not to. 7 people around Harold's kitchen table, eating soup and cornbread, in a house that was 2 years of one man's engineering genius and 4 weeks of our preparation. Quinn, had 3 servings. Arlo ate so fast that Vale made a sound I can only describe as disapproving. Felix, propped up in the guest room and brought a plate, said it was the best thing he'd eaten in 6 weeks, which I chose to believe. Rowan ate carefully and watched everything the same way she'd watched the hallway, cataloging, processing. I kept thinking I'd catch her not paying attention, and she never was. After dinner, and when the others had dispersed to various parts of the house and it was just me and Rowan in the kitchen with the cleanup, she said, "You prepared for a long time before this happened." 2 years of research, I said, plus 4 weeks of actual prep. The research was for the book. The book is what made me do the research. I needed to understand how it worked before I could write it. I dried a bowl. I didn't expect to need the research for anything other than the book. Does that feel strange, writing something and then living it? I thought about this honestly. It feels like being haunted by my own work, like I built a map for a territory I didn't know was real, and then someone handed me the map and said, "Here, this is where you are." The map was accurate. Mostly. Some things have been different. What things? The people, I said. I wrote people in the book. And then I met real people, and there's no way to model that correctly. The specific way your teammate talks to manage his fear, the way the quiet one watches everything, the way I stopped. The way I what? She said. Make me feel like I'm being assessed even when you're not looking at me, I said. She was quiet for a beat. I'm always looking, she said. I've just learned to do it without being obvious about it. I know, I said. I'm always writing. We're both doing the same thing. She looked at me then. Directly, the way she apparently did when she decided the indirect approach wasn't sufficient. I'd like to read the book, she said. The one you're writing now. How do you know I'm writing one? You have a notebook in every room, she said. Different notebooks, different subjects, I'm guessing. You write down whatever's happening in real time. Old habit. Good habit. She handed me the last bowl to dry. I'd like to read it when it's done. When it's done, I said, you'll probably be in it. I assumed, she said. And this time the smile completed itself. Felix stayed, 2 weeks. This is the part of the story where I am going to be very restrained because it involves my sister's private life, and Nadia has a strong opinion about what gets written down versus what stays in the family. What I will say is this: Nadia Hartwell, trauma surgeon, 3 years my senior, who had not been in a serious relationship since the bad one that ended the year after our parents died, and who had responded to that history by becoming extremely competent at everything and slightly defended about anything that required the kind of sustained vulnerability that relationships demand, started spending a notable amount of time in the guest room, for medical reasons ostensibly, for monitoring purposes, for what she called patient management, which, in my observation, involved a lot of conversations that had nothing to do with medicine, conducted in the relaxed body language of 2 people who have discovered they can talk to each other. Felix Navarro was, from what I could tell through careful observation, and one extremely useful conversation with Quinn, a person who listened. He was good at this in the way that some people are good at things without knowing they're good at them. naturally without performance. He asked questions that suggested he'd heard the answers to previous questions. He was patient in the specific way that isn't passive but active. The patience of someone who has learned to wait for what matters. He was 30 years old. He was thoughtful. He was, when he wasn't getting shot in the shoulder, apparently quite funny in a quiet, understated way that Nadia found funnier than she wanted to let on. I watched my sister laugh twice in the first 3 days of his recovery. Not the professional courtesy laugh or the family obligation laugh, the actual one, involuntary, that happens when something surprises you into finding it genuinely funny. I had not seen that laugh in 2.5 years. I wrote it down, not to use it, just to have a record that it happened. Rowan and the others left the night of day 2 with the plan to return and check on Felix every few days. Before she left, standing at the gate in Harold's courtyard, she said to me, "The radio. When you need it, use it. That's not contingent on anything." "Okay," I said. "And the other thing?" "What other thing?" She thought about how to phrase it. "The stream you did. The warning. Most people who heard it didn't take it seriously." "I know. I took it seriously," she said, "and it mattered. What you did mattered. Even if you can't see the whole trail from cause to effect yet." I wanted to say something substantive in response to this and instead said, "I deleted the account." "I know," she said. "I still found you." I noticed. The corner of her mouth moved again. "Stay safe," she said, and left. I stood in Harold's courtyard in the October dark after the gate closed and felt something I hadn't fully felt since August 8th, when I'd watched the trending topic and known what it meant. The specific, strange relief of being understood by someone who sees the same things you see. The days got colder and quieter and longer in the way that long things do. We established a rhythm that was partly survival and partly ordinary life pretending to be survival. Mornings in the courtyard, checking the garden, tending the fruit trees that were going dormant for fall. Afternoons reading from Harold's library, which was substantial and eclectic and included 3 volumes on food preservation that proved immediately useful. Evenings cooking from our stores, eating together, talking, playing checkers. I was getting better. Nadia was still better than me. Listening to the radio. The radio brought us things gradually. Quinn's voice checking in every few days, relentlessly cheerful in the specific way of someone who has found that cheerfulness is a form of discipline. Vale's voice occasionally, brief and exact, confirming status or relaying information with the minimum of words required. Arlo once, very excited, reporting that he had found a coyote den half a mile from the base and had taken photographs, and then someone, probably Vale, saying something in the background that caused Arlo to end the transmission with suspicious speed. And Rowan's voice, most nights, short transmissions, status reports. I do the occasional question about something I'd written or observed that she'd been thinking about. Professional in form, but, as I learned to read her, personal in content. The things she chose to ask were not operational. They were about the research, the book, the specific way I thought about things, in the careful circling approach of someone who finds directness difficult in contexts where it matters most. I transmitted back, I answered questions, I asked my own. Slowly, over 3 weeks of radio contact, I got to know her the way you get to know someone when the conversation has to carry more weight than the situation allows for. When you're on opposite ends of a radio and you can't see each other and everything extraneous has been stripped away and what's left is just what you actually think. I added entries to my notebook about this, which I had started thinking of less as research notes and more as the first draft of the book I was going to write when everything was over, the book about what I'd seen and done and what it had cost and what it had unexpectedly given me. Not a thriller, something else, something true. The thing about Nadia's zombie behavior journal, it mattered. She had been keeping it since day 3, systematic observations of the infected individuals she could observe from Harold's roof deck. Movement patterns, behavioral responses to stimuli, physical deterioration over time. She'd filled 6 notebooks by week 8. She'd started reaching conclusions, held carefully, qualified constantly, revised as new evidence emerged. In week 9, she noticed that the zombies in our neighborhood had gotten faster. Not dramatically faster, not movie zombie faster, but measurably, documentably faster than they'd been in week 3. And there were more of them, where we'd expected fewer as the initial wave spread outward and thinned. "Something has changed," she told me over breakfast. "Changed how?" "The transmission rate seems to have increased. New infections are presenting faster than early cases. The behavioral onset is earlier in the infection cycle." She showed me the notebook. "And the locomotion of newly infected individuals is more efficient. They're not accelerating the way a living person would if they were running, but they're not shuffling the way the oldest cases do." I pulled up my research document, the section I'd written, based on general viral behavior data. Second-generation strains of outbreak pathogens frequently present with modified transmission characteristics. Whether this represents viral evolution or simply the emergence of a faster-acting initial strain is difficult to determine without laboratory analysis. I'd written that as general epidemiological caution. I hadn't expected it to be immediately relevant. "You should be talking to virologists," I said. "I don't have virologists. Rowan's people have a doctor," I said. I'd heard the reference in radio traffic. The doc, never named, someone being kept at the base for reasons the team was careful not to elaborate. Someone with relevant expertise. Nadia looked at her notebook. "I'll request a consultation," she said, in the manner of a person who has spent her professional life navigating the specific political landscape of hospital interdepartmental relations. The doctor's name was Osei. Dr. Amara Osei, epidemiologist, infectious disease specialist, and, as it turned out, the person whose work had been closest to identifying the source of the outbreak before it became something that couldn't be identified in advance. He had been found by Rowan's team in a parking garage off Route 17, alone and alive, and with a briefcase full of research and the particular 1,000-yard look of someone who had been sitting with catastrophic knowledge for 6 weeks without anyone to tell it to. He had been shot before they found him, not by zombies. Nadia operated on him at the base during our first visit. I'll tell you about the visit in a moment, but the surgery first, because it was what the visit was for and what made everything else possible. The wound was serious. She treated it with the focused competence that I had by now come to understand was less personality than professional practice. When the situation requires precision, Nadia becomes precision. Felix assisted. He'd recovered enough to be useful in the medical bay, and he was useful in the quiet, reliable way that he did most things. Nadia gave instructions, and he followed them. And I watched from a respectful distance and noted the specific ease of two people who have figured out how to work together. After the surgery, after Dr. Osei was stable and sedated, Nadia came to find me in the base's kitchen, with the expression she uses when she's carrying information she needs to process out loud. "He was there," she said. "Where?" "At the Research Institute. He'd been studying the virus, studying the potential for it. Variants that existed in biosafety level research conditions. He said it didn't come from nature. She said this in a particular way, the careful way you say something enormous. Someone made it or modified it. Something that existed as a research subject became a weapon, and someone put it in the world deliberately." I sat with this. My research for Zero Patient had included a chapter on weaponized pathogen release scenarios, which my editor had also asked me to tone down, and which I had toned down because it was speculative and potentially irresponsible to present as plausible in a thriller aimed at a general readership. The research was there in my files, though. The possibility had always been in the files. "Is he going to make it?" I said. "Yes," Nadia said. "He's going to make it. And he's going to be very important when this is over." The base was on a ridge. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I keep putting it off because describing it accurately requires me to admit that it was genuinely impressive in a way that made me feel briefly that we should have thought of it first. Howard Vance had been good. Rowan Delaney's team had been better, partly because they had resources and training we didn't, and partly because they'd identified the location, a private property on a ridge accessible by exactly one road, surrounded on 3 sides by a drop to a creek bed 40 feet below, with the specific logic of people who had been thinking operationally since before the outbreak started. They had demolished the original access road. They'd replaced it with a retractable bridge, operated manually from inside the property. You couldn't reach the ridge without their permission. The bridge folded away to nothing when not in use. 3 sides, sheer drop. One side they controlled. I stood at the folded bridge on my first visit and looked down at the creek bed and then looked at Rowan. The CDC reports had a section on defensive perimeter establishment, I said. They did, she said. You read those. I read everything, she said. That's the job. The inside of the property was 3 stories of a stone manor house that had clearly been expensive before and was now something else entirely. Functional, efficient, every room with a clear purpose and no wasted space. Solar installation, generator backup. A medical bay that Nadia walked through with the reverence of a person encountering something they'd been designing in their head for months. A kitchen with a cold room built to store what their own land produced. Chickens, a kitchen garden, a small pond they'd stocked with fish. Quinn took me on a tour of the back section, the livestock, the garden, the supply infrastructure, with the running commentary that was just his natural state of being. He knew everything about the property in the way that people who work together in small groups know everything about where they live, specifically, intimately, with the occasional aside about who had made which decision and why it had or hadn't turned out to be the right call. I collected information the way I always do, quietly, through questions that seemed incidental, through what people chose to emphasize when they could have said anything. What I learned, Rowan had led the decision to come to our property over an objection from Vale, who thought the exposure risk was too high, and with support from Felix, who had read my book and agreed with Rowan's assessment of the research. What I learned, they'd been tracking Dr. Ozzy since the 2nd week of the outbreak, knowing he had information relevant to understanding the source, waiting for a safe window to extract him. What I learned, the government contact they'd been working toward had recently been re-established, and something large was in planning, though Quinn deflected when I pushed on specifics. What I didn't learn, because I didn't ask, because some things you gather from available evidence rather than direct inquiry, was the thing that made the most sense of all of it. That Rowan Delaney had been doing this kind of work for long enough to trust her instincts absolutely, and her instinct, from August 8th onward, had been that the novelist with the accurate research model was worth knowing. On the drive back to Harold's house, she rode with me while Felix drove. We didn't talk about operational things. We talked about zero patient, the choices I'd made in the research, the places where I'd simplified for the sake of the narrative, the ways reality had diverged from my model. She'd read it more carefully than most reviewers. She'd noticed things I'd put in deliberately and things I'd put in by accident. She had opinions about the ending, which she delivered with the careful precision of someone who had thought about it seriously. The protagonist survives, she said, but the way you wrote it, it feels like survival is the compromise. Like the better ending would have been different. The research said survivors felt that way, I said. People who come through catastrophic events often describe it as losing the version of themselves that would have known what to do, like survival is a new self, not a continuation of the old one. Do you feel that? I haven't died, I said, so I don't know yet. But you've lost things. Everyone has. I mean specific things, specific to you. I thought about this honestly. The certainty, I said. Before, I thought my research was an approximation of reality. Now I know it was. And knowing it was makes the parts I got wrong feel like failures in a way they didn't before when they were just narrative choices. What did you get wrong? The people are better than I wrote them, I said, consistently. In the book, the survival instinct crowds out everything else. In practice, I keep watching people make decisions that cost them personally to help someone else. I didn't model for enough of that. She was quiet for a moment. You modeled for it, she said. You just didn't believe it. Yeah, I said. I didn't believe it. She looked out the window at the landscape moving past, cleared of zombies in this sector, the cleanup operation having reached us 3 weeks ago, the streets looking almost ordinary in the way that disaster sites do when the acute phase ends and what's left is just damage without motion. For the record, she said, I believe it. What you did with the stream, preparing your sister. The house. She said this with the same matter-of-fact directness she used for everything, without softening it with sentiment. You made good decisions with what you knew. I made the obvious decisions, I said. Obvious decisions are rarer than you think, she said. I put that in the notebook when I got home. The vaccine came in January, which felt both impossibly fast and impossibly slow, the way all timelines feel when you are inside them. The first signal came through the frequency. Dr. Osei's involvement had accelerated certain things, connections he had that no one else had, access to research threads that had been running in parallel throughout the outbreak period. The federal infrastructure had never fully collapsed. It had contracted and adapted and was now expanding again, slowly from the inside out. Clinical trials complete. Production commencing. Priority distribution, medical and military. General population a 2. Nadia read the transmission 3 times in a row. She was standing in Harold's kitchen with her coffee getting cold, which is how I know something has gotten to her. The coffee goes cold because she forgets it. "Okay," she said very quietly. "Yeah," I said. "We're actually going to get out of this. We're getting out of this." She sat down. Slowly, in the way of someone whose legs have decided something that the rest of them is still processing. I sat across from her. I let her be quiet for as long as she needed. Outside, in Harold's courtyard, the fruit trees were bare. Winter had taken the leaves, but the branches were solid, and in the spring, they'd come back. "I want to call Dad," she said. It wasn't wishing he were alive. It was something else. The specific need, in moments of relief, to tell someone who loved you. The person you go to first. We both knew who that was, and we both knew he wasn't there. And we sat with that for a while. "He would have found 3 things to improve about the prep plan," I said. "He would have built a second wall," she said. "He would have said the gate needed a different lock. He would have been right about the lock, probably. Probably. He would have been very proud," she said, "of all of it, of you." I didn't say anything for a while. "He'd have read the book," she said. "He'd have had opinions about the second act." "Everyone has opinions about the second act," she laughed. The real laugh, the involuntary one. And then she covered her face with her hands for a moment, not crying, but adjacent to it, which is as close as Nadia Hartwell gets. Felix came into the kitchen, found us, and without asking any questions, put the kettle on and made tea, which was the right call and tells you everything you need to know about why Nadia started laughing at things he said. The annihilation plan, Rowan's name for it, delivered without irony in a briefing format that made clear she saw nothing dramatic in the term, was simple in concept and massive in execution. The infected could be moved with sound and light. They followed stimulus. The behavior had been consistent since August. What the plan required was scale, enough aircraft, enough speakers, enough coordination to move large concentrations of infected to designated open areas, stadiums, fairgrounds, industrial zones, and contain them there. The vaccine meant the remaining infected population could be addressed without the infection risk that had made this impossible in the fall. The vaccine meant personnel could operate in the field. The vaccine meant the math had changed. The military coordination went above my clearance level, which I didn't have a clearance level at all, but was treated as if I did because of Rowan's sponsorship. The planning meetings I was allowed to observe from a distance showed me people doing something I'd written about in Zero Patient and never fully believed. The specific competence of institutions that had been designed to not fail, demonstrating that they had, in fact, been designed correctly. It took 3 weeks to set up. It took 3 days to execute. We watched from Harold's roof deck. I had binoculars. Nadia had her notebook. We stood up there in the cold February morning and watched helicopters rise from the south, 18 of them, in a formation that moved with the precision of something that had been rehearsed extensively. Drones followed, smaller, moving faster, spreading out in a coordinated pattern over the city. The sound they produced, a layered, complex audio signal designed by someone who had researched exactly what frequencies and rhythms the infected responded to most consistently, came to us distorted by distance. A low, strange, attention-claiming pulse that we felt more than heard. Below, in the streets we could see from Harold's roof, the zombies who had been there since November turned toward it and began to walk, not toward us, away from us. In the direction of the sound, the way moths turn toward light, the way anything responds to the thing it's built to respond to. I watched this for a long time. The courtyard was quiet. Harold's fruit trees stood in their winter branches. Nadia stood next to me with her arms crossed, and her face doing nothing, because that's how she holds things that are too large for normal expression. "We should plant more this spring," I said. "We should," she said. The kale is going to come back. The kale always comes back. We could do tomatoes this time. Real ones. I know how to do tomatoes now, she said. I read the book. Which book? Harold's book. He had a whole section. I know. I read it too. We were quiet. The helicopters had passed out of sight. The streets below were empty of movement. The quiet was a different quality of quiet than the one we'd had before. Not the absence of a thing, but the presence of something else. The specific silence of a thing that is over. Rowan's coming by tomorrow, I said. I know. With Felix? I know, she said in a different register. The one that meant she knew I'd noticed and was choosing not to engage with my noticing. I'm not saying anything, I said. Good, she said. He's good, Nadia. I know he is. I'm just... Lev, she looked at me. I know, okay, I know. Okay. I'm figuring it out. Up at my own pace. Okay. Stop smiling. I'm not smiling. You're doing the face. I don't have a face. She pushed me gently on the shoulder, the sibling equivalent of a lot of things that neither of us had the language for. We stood there while the morning got brighter and the city below us stayed quiet. And it was, for the first time in 6 months, possible to imagine what came next. The foreign intelligence operation was something I wasn't supposed to know about and found out about anyway. Because I am a novelist, and noticing things other people don't notice is the mechanism by which I pay my bills. The radio traffic had been different for 4 days. Shorter transmissions, coded references, the specific compressed energy of people who are moving fast and don't want to explain why. I'd been tracking it in the notebook and had 3 theories, of which the right one was the most alarming. The annihilation plan had required the vaccine synthesis protocols to be transmitted to multiple allied nations. Someone had intercepted those transmissions, someone with the resources to do something about what they'd intercepted. When Rowan told me, directly, the way she told me things when she'd decided I could handle them, she said, they want the process, not the product. If they get the synthesis methodology, they control production going forward. What are you doing about it? We have a window, she said. 12 hours. We move in 8. How many people? Enough. Rowan. She looked at me. This is the specific thing about Rowan that I didn't know how to account for. She always looked at me when I said her name. And when she looked at me, it was the full version, not the assessing version, but the actual one. Like whatever she was managing in the spaces between us got set aside. We'll be careful, she said. That's not the answer I was asking for. I know, she said. It's the one I can give you. I thought about the 600 pages of research I'd read about pandemic responses, the section on institutional continuity, the paragraph I'd written about the specific cost of the people who hold things together. I thought about the book I was writing, which was starting to know what it was about. Come back, I said. That's the plan, she said in the flat. Certain way, she said things she intended to be true. They came back. Felix had a bruised rib. Quinn had a cut on his forearm that Nadia dressed in the kitchen the next morning, talking him through it in the matter-of-fact way of someone who has stopped being surprised by the situations she's asked to handle. Vale was fine. Arlo had, apparently, been remarkable under fire in a way that Quinn wanted to tell me about in detail, and that Arlo deflected with visible embarrassment. Rowan came back. I didn't say anything dramatic when she walked through Harold's gate. I was standing in the courtyard, which is where I'd been since the radio went quiet, and she came through the gate and looked at me from across the space, and I said, "The kale survived the winter." She looked at me for a moment. "Of course it did," she said. "I was going to make soup." "Good," she said. "I'm starving." I made soup. We ate it in Harold's kitchen with everyone around the table in the version of togetherness that emerges between people who have been through something and come out the other side and don't need to talk about it right now because they can see each other and that's enough. After dinner, Nadia and Felix did the dishes. After dinner, Quinn told a story that made everyone laugh, that I can't reproduce because it involved classified information. After dinner, Rowan and I sat on Harold's roof deck in the cold and looked at a sky that was starting to show stars through the light pollution that was coming back. Slowly, unevenly, the city rebuilding itself in stops and starts. "I read the draft," she said. "Which draft?" "The one you left on the kitchen table 2 weeks ago, the first 40 pages. I processed this. Ah, that was private. You left it on the kitchen table, in my own house, which I visit regularly, with permission, with standing permission, she said, which creates a different standard. She said this very reasonably, in the way of someone who has thought through the argument in advance. The 40 pages are good. They're a draft. They're better than most finished things I've read. She was quiet for a moment. You wrote about the spinach. The spinach matters. You wrote about the caterpillars. The caterpillars also matter. You wrote about the checkers. What's your point? My point, she said, is that you're writing the right book. Not the one anyone would expect from you after Zero Patient. Not the thriller, the other one. I looked at the sky. There's a section about you, I said. I assumed. It's honest. I hoped it would be. It might be too honest. She thought about this. Is there anything in it that isn't true? No. Then it's the right amount of honest, she said. I looked at her. She was looking at the sky, at the returning lights of the city, at the specific February sky of a place that had been through something and was beginning, slowly, to be something else. She had the contained quality she always had, the management of a lot of things happening simultaneously in a small visible space. But there was something else there tonight, something looser, the way a person looks when they've decided they don't have to manage everything right now. I'd like to show you the rest of it, I said, when it's done. I'd like to read it, she said. It's going to be about all of this. The preparation, Harold's house, and the gate and the checkers and the garden and the convoy and, I know, she said, it should be. It's also going to be about the people, I said. That's the part I got wrong in the first book. The people are better than I thought, consistently better. She looked at me then. The full version. I know, she said. That's why I came looking for you. The rebuilding was slower than the destruction, which is always how it works and never stops being frustrating. And also always worth it, which is the only reason anyone ever bothers. We stayed at Harold's house through March, partly because the urban infrastructure was still unstable, partly because the garden needed to be started for spring before we handed the property over to anyone, partly because Harold's house had become something to us, not just a shelter but a place with the specific weight that places accumulate from being lived in through the kinds of things that change you. I planted the spring vegetables, tomatoes this time, started inside in Harold's kitchen in seed trays we'd found in his garage, peppers, cucumbers, lettuce again, because I had a relationship with lettuce at this point. I considered myself a lettuce person. I was not going to lose the thread. Nadia planted kale because Nadia. She planted it in the same bed it had been in all winter, the one that had survived everything, Amrido, and patted the soil down with the particular satisfaction of someone who has made peace with a vegetable. Felix came on the weekends. Rowan came with him most of the time. Quinn came once and ate all the tomato seedlings labels because he thought they were snacks, which he disputes to this day. We did not invite Quinn back to the seedling stage. The city reopened in stages, schools, then businesses, then restaurants. The day the first coffee shop on Mercer Street reopened. Not the same one. That owner hadn't made it, but a new one, same block. I walked there from the apartment Nadia and I had moved back into and sat at a table by the window and ordered the same thing I'd always ordered and read the paper. The paper was still publishing. The paper had not stopped publishing, not for a single week, because someone had thought that was important and had made sure it happened. I thought about that for a long time over my coffee. I thought about the things that had kept going when everything else stopped. The people who had decided that they were going to keep doing what mattered until they couldn't anymore. The people who had held things together, Nadia and her surgical kit and her zombie journal that was now in the hands of epidemiologists who were describing it as an unprecedented observational data set. Dr. Osi, recovering, already talking to research institutions about the work that needed to happen. Rowan's team, filing reports, debriefing, being careful about what got recorded and why. I thought about Howard Vance, who had built a house for a disaster he'd expected and died before it arrived, and whose engineering decisions had kept two people alive who might not have been otherwise. I thought about the reader who had sent me a DM at 11 p.m. on August 8th and said, "I'm looking at the same data you are." And I thought about the things that had followed from that. The lockbox, The radio, the gate opening, the soup, the roof deck in February with the stars coming back, the 40 pages on the kitchen table. The small hinge things, the things that look from far away, like coincidence, and look from up close, like choices. My coffee was getting cold. I opened my notebook and started writing. I'm finishing this in May. It's warm now, the kind of warm that feels earned after a winter like the one we had. The city is doing the things cities do when they decide to survive, making noise, generating friction, having opinions, being itself in the specific, difficult, particular way that Harlow City has always been itself. Harold's house has new tenants, a family of 4 who found it through a post-outbreak housing program and who are, from what I hear, getting the hang of the courtyard garden. I gave them the notebook I'd kept about the fruit trees and the vegetable beds and where Harold had stored the extra seeds. I didn't tell them about Howard Vance because that story belongs to his family and not to me. But I hope they appreciate what he built. I hope they take care of it. Nadia is back at work. Full schedule, which for Nadia means a schedule that would hospitalize most people. Felix is nearby. The nature of their arrangement is, as she would say, their own business. And she would add that I am the last person whose opinions are solicited on matters of her personal life. She would be right. I note only that she is happy in a way that has the ring of something decided rather than something happening to her. And for Nadia, who has spent her whole adult life managing things that happened to her, that distinction means a lot. Quinn got himself a rescue dog and named it something I'm not going to write down because it's deeply embarrassing, and he deserves better than to have it in print. The dog is large and opinionated. They're well matched. Vale is doing something classified. Arlo is applying to medical school. Dr. Osei is testifying before a congressional subcommittee next month and has told me, in his careful, precise way, that he is not nervous, which I do not believe for a second. Rowan is Rowan. She's doing the work, which is what she does, what she'll always do, which is one of the things about her that I've stopped trying to accommodate and started trying to understand instead. She came to my apartment last week for dinner and stayed for 3 hours, and we talked about the book, this book, which she has now read in full, and about what comes after the book, and about other things. The kind of other things that are harder to write about than outbreak timelines and virology models because they require a different kind of honesty. She said, "The part about Howard Vance is the best part." I said, "The part about Harold." She said, "You call him Harold." I said, "I needed to feel some affection for him." She said, "You did?" We were quiet for a while. "The part where you're reading the research document at midnight," she said, "that's where it starts. Not the outbreak. Not the preparation. That moment when you looked at the trending topic and then looked at your own notes. That's when I knew it was real," I said. "That's when you decided to do something about it," she said. "There's a difference." I thought about this. "I didn't want to be right," I said. "I spent 2 years on that research and I would have given everything to be completely, entirely wrong." "I know," she said. "That's what makes it the right kind of knowing." The kind you don't want." She was right. She usually is about the things that matter. I find this mostly charming and occasionally annoying, which seems like a fair distribution. I'm going to send this manuscript to my editor next week. She is going to have opinions about the second act and the ending, and she's going to be right about some of them and wrong about others, and we're going to argue about it in the collegial, specific way of people who have been working together long enough to trust each other's arguments even when they disagree. The book is called Zero Patient, same as the first one. Different book, same title. My editor thinks this is confusing. I think it's honest. Both books are about the same thing, approached from opposite directions. The first one was imagined. This one is real. I put everything in it. The caterpillars, the checkers, the soup Nadia made that was objectively not good, and that we ate anyway because she made it and that was enough. The spinach I grew in Harold's courtyard, and the feeling I had crouching over it in October, which I still can't fully explain except to say it felt like evidence, specific, fragile, green evidence, that things could still grow. I put in Howard Vance and his 12-foot walls and his meticulous binder and his fruit trees that made it through the winter. I put in the convoy, and the gate, and the radio frequency. I put in Nadia's laugh, the real one. I put in a lot of things that are hard to write and that I wrote anyway, because the point of doing this job, the actual point, the one that survives everything else, is to record what happened as honestly as you can so that the people who weren't there can understand it, and the people who were there can find themselves in it, and everyone can know this is what it cost, and this is what it gave, and we were here, and we held on. Send the Kale came back in the spring. It always comes back. That's the whole story. Lev Hartwell is the author of Zero Patient, first edition, a novel, and Zero Patient, second edition, this. He lives in Harlow City. The fruit trees in Harold's courtyard are doing well. End.